What would you say to people, not necessarily architects, but how can people in property go about creating their own new technologies?
Yeah, probably not very popular answer to this, but I get asked a version of this question quite often, and I sort of feel that the best way to do it is to really commit to it. Actually, there's a kind of lot of myth making, I think, in the idea that technology is going to be super easy and super slick, and it's going to cost almost nothing, and it's going to kind of arrive really quickly. I think you have to really commit to this as a process. I think, and commit to the kind of people that you need to get involved in your business to do it. I think also to make it as non-transactional as possible is really important. I think that the success we've been able to have is through building stuff directly with clients, so not making a kind of software product and then trying to inject it into their business, but building things that are very kind of business or client specific, let's say. And that makes that a reflexive process that has to emerge over time, not something that can kind of be super transactional. I think that's very important.
So have you hired at the outset knowing that people are going to have to design and use software, or do you send people away on courses that them from...
No, so we have a very specific recruitment strategy which we developed before as we set the team up, and targeting particular master's programs from universities in the UK, and that really align with our goals. We also are very aware of the difficulty in, say, from my point of view, say, hiring someone with a software development background, bringing 1, 2, 3, or 4 of those kinds of individuals into an architecture and engineering firm of 200 people. There's a disconnect there between the goals, probably. So we try to build a team initially from people who understood the sector somewhat, and then create an environment. And actually, our next kind of version of our team growth is about hiring software developers more specifically, so that there's a more familiar environment that they can be embedded into, rather than a disconnect between the context and the staff themselves.
Yeah, and Barry, when you see the sort of digital construction model there and the way that can work, do you see the benefits of having that sort of digital capture in the field and speeding things up? Is that something you?
Without a slight doubt. I think throughout the process, you've got the construction side, but equally the design side, and the key thing for me though is the adoption in the field, and whether people actually will use it. And I suppose our strategy is, in lots of ways, is twofold. One is aim big, so look at the big picture stuff and what you can achieve, but equally chip away at it. So and as I mentioned, don't be afraid to fail. Implement stuff. We tend to find it doesn't work the first time. So most of our projects, when we implement the technology, the first one is a bit meh. It's the second one and the third one where we've learned and we've got better, and the technology has become perhaps more appropriate, and it works better the second time. And by the third time, it's just embedded in the project. You don't even think of it as technology.
Luke, how do you get somebody that's hungover on a Monday morning to use their new tablet and find a new way of working? What's the sort of reception like on the site?
Just to build on that, dealing with the hangover is the hard part, but having somebody or building it with someone there who's an advocate to start with helped us get the success rate the first time around. So involving those people in the process meant that when they got their hands on it, it felt familiar. And actually, when 2 or 3 people like that in a team of 10 are using it and are delivering things much more quickly than the other 7 soon get on board. So there's that collaborative way of working, but also the demographics are changing. So the hungover on a Monday morning is becoming less so as we get as we get the younger generations coming into construction. So and fortunately the team on John F. Hunt were actually not the typical demographic. We had a lot more tech-savvy people on there, so it was easier. But they had a lot of technology to deal with. But admittedly, that is still a big challenge. Adoption is still a massive challenge, and something we have to build into the process rather than just chuck software at them.
Yeah. There was a question I saw pop up before the Slido slide went down. I think it was about, there's loads coming through. Luke, who owns the data? Who owns the model at the end?
In that case, it would be John F. Hunt who owns the model, but they obviously the software vendors all have access to all their own pieces of that of data, but the data is all owned by the client, and that's just standard for us.
And in terms of when it's sold on, does it stay with the building? Have you seen any?
It stays with the building, and obviously as we move more onto the operations and maintenance side, we're seeing more technology come on now, where now it's up, and we've got the as-builts. We're seeing, the 3D scanning tech come in, and then the digital evidence of the progression of the building moving more into the mindset of digital twins and collecting data about building performance. All of that's, kind of the next iteration of what we've shown there. That was just really covering getting the building out of the ground. But it's all in the best interest of the owner, to maximise the impact of the building.
Yeah. And Joe, how are you and Mills and Reeve engaging with clients on some of these changes and the changes in the wider property industry?
Yeah, it's something we've been looking at for a while now. So on the legal tech side, there's quite a lot we're doing to change the way that we're working by developing new products. And again, it's very much client-based solutions. So a client will come to us with a particular issue and we try and use tech to solve that for them. But yeah, we're also finding that clients want to engage on wider changes to the property industry, whether that's through prop tech, but also social, economic changes, how the investment landscape is adapting by occupier trends and that kind of thing. So we've got an exciting disruptors community that we've set up on that just to engage with clients. We hold various events such as on autonomous vehicles, the impact on placemaking, wellness in buildings, all that kind of thing, and just give opportunities to connect clients and to really chat through those issues.
And can you tell us some of the things that you're doing as a firm and that other firms in the industry, in the sector are doing?
Yeah, there's quite a lot going on now. I think the pace of change is picking up on legal tech. So Barry's right in his talks to mention how the legal framework needs to catch up to embrace a lot of these changes. But what we're doing is really changing the way that we're working to increase efficiencies and to improve the accuracy of what we produce as well. So just from my world, kind of investment transactions where we're dealing with large property portfolios, the legal due diligence exercise can be massive. So we're now developing digital software that will help us with that. We have data extraction tools that we can use to review leases. That speeds up transactions hugely, so our lawyers effectively can get the key information taken out of a lease. They can then review it very quickly and report to a client in a user-friendly way. That's just one example of some of the software that we're using to help clients.
Yeah, thank you. And the questions keep coming. There's a question, Barry, about the sort of the digital divide, the gap, people that maybe don't have a smartphone. Something we've heard for years about sort of internet access and the percentage that 25% often quoted don't have a PC at home, so services moving online. I mean, is that something that you're aware of with people that will eventually populate your schemes?
I think there are a couple of aspects to that question. I think in terms of the adoption of technology, and I think somebody mentioned this earlier, I think we always run the risk of perfection being the enemy of the good, and sometimes I think we delay the implementation of technology because it's not perfect. So the question there around the app we have for consulting prior to planning, does it pick up everybody? No, it doesn't. Does it pick up a heck of a lot more people than if you didn't use it, as it does? And I think you probably go from probably 1% of the population to probably closer to 50 to 60%. What's interesting is when you look at the profile of the people that actually respond, it's not just the teenagers and the 20-year-olds, it is across the board. So there is a slight weighting to the younger person, but there is equally a very high interaction rate with the more elderly, for example. So it's not perfect, and I think when we actually then start looking at the community app within our developments, we need to sort of engage with more traditional approaches as well. So again, for me, it's just about technology isn't there to make you lazy. It shouldn't be there to replace what you should otherwise be doing. It should be there to supplement what you're doing, and I think that's the approach we take.
Yeah, and obviously, as the developer on stage, a lot of questions pointed at you. The question about how do you influence other sort of third-party consultants, other parts of the project team that maybe aren't as championing new ways of doing things?
So the inappropriate response to that is shaming. So what we tend to do, if we've got 2 or 3 consultants across different projects, and there's a great piece of technology being used by one of them, we'll point it out to the others. and you tend to find that peer pressure and shaming has quite and ultimately it's a way of winning a job. So you tend to find that actually getting consultants to adopt technology is not as hard as perhaps other people.
Yeah. Okay. Any questions from the floor? Anybody want to exercise their arms and go in that way? Feel free to put your hand up at any time. Joe, in terms of sort of throwing the eye forward, how do you see the role of the real estate lawyer changing in the next 10, 20 years, and what would be some of the new tools and techniques that might be required?
Yeah, I think it's going to change hugely. So I guess data is the big topic here. So as we can more easily capture data and analyze it much more quickly, the role of the lawyer will be a lot more about helping clients assess risk, manage data, present it in a much more user-friendly format. So, I mean, the example I was speaking about before, suddenly we'll be able to analyze, hundreds of leases just very quickly overnight. And then it's going to be about how we present that to clients. So those in the room might be glad to hear that I think the future of will probably be less of the kind of very, very long due diligence reports that can be difficult to work through, and we'll have to find ways of presenting information digitally to clients and making it much more user-friendly, and also just embracing tech engineers as part of our business. So we already have trainees coming through the firm who are project and innovation specialists, not lawyers. Our first one started this week, actually. So I think it's going to be about broadening the range of services that we offer to clients.
And do you think there's a sort of onus on employers from sort of top down to reskill and put innovation and technology through workforces, and a question across, or is it on employees to upskill themselves and prepare themselves for their career in property and real estate for the next 25 years or whatever? Anybody?
I mean, the way we run it internally is we have what we describe as a series of acronym of PPPs, but which are individual aspects that we think we should be getting better at as a business. And we have individuals who put their hand up and take responsibility for that particular aspect of improvement. And it is their responsibility to, if they're passionate about it and they're good at it, to learn about it and then to implement it and to encourage their colleagues to implement it in the various projects. So we try and delegate that responsibility to individuals who are passionate about whatever that is, and whether that's, it's something around the management side, it's something around the environmental side, it's something around the design side, it doesn't matter. We have those, and people are responsible for, as part of their day job, for implementing those and coming up with new ideas.
No, I think that's a really good point, actually. You have to be able to, as a business, define what it is that you value, in order that then your teams can respond to that with their passion, with their interest. And of course there's a responsibility on everybody in a way to kind of continually improve yourself, but the way we handle that is at a micro level. There is internal knowledge sharing and training on technical aspects, but once that gets beyond a certain scale, then we step in and provide whatever level of training might be necessary for a current employee to keep progressing. But that's not really valuable unless you have that framework of these are the things we think are important, because otherwise you have people just kind of wandering everywhere, following hobbyist interest, let's say, which is not going to help their career either.
Yeah.
So I think it's a bit of both.
There needs to be a structure to it. There's a question you both mentioned about sustainability. Obviously, the climate crisis is really at the top of the agenda for a lot of people and businesses. I know there's businesses in London marching tomorrow with the Green Strike. I can't remember ever seeing press releases and notices coming through as a journalist about businesses marching, which is amazing that we've seen in the last week or so, and more of that, please. Can anybody tell us about technologies, materials, anything you're using to help us move towards creating carbon neutral buildings?
Probably for me again, I guess. I'm going to start by saying how frustrating it is that more isn't being done. I think there are simple things we are using. We're using alternatives to concrete, for example, for structural, and using panels which come from coal ash, for example, the big mountains of those. So there are lots of ways that you can adopt elements. We're using it, I think the phrase is, it's like an Oxford window frame type space, which actually creates energy from the sunlight that comes through windows. So, but that's very much our approach, because there aren't very good, in our opinion, big top-down solutions on the construction side. So our approach is, rather than just sort of throwing our hands up and saying it's all too hard, is just to adopt small elements. You can't currently in this country build with bamboo. You won't pass any of the regs. It's very frustrating that you can't either build with timber at the moment as well, on the back of Grenfell, and obviously that was a terrible tragedy, but it's had an unintended consequence of stepping the industry back probably 10 to 15 years in terms of some of the products that it could otherwise be using, which are much more environmentally friendly. So yeah, elements we are embedding, but there needs to be way more done.
I couldn't agree more with the comment about the slowness of change. I think, especially from sort of physical products point of view. One of the things that I would say from a designer's point of view that we're really interested in with digital tech is the possibility for algorithmic design approaches to allow us to explore many more options during the design process, and improve those options and find the most suitable that fits not just the physical site, but actually the business goals, the community goals, and actually to build the right building. One of the biggest mistakes that we make in the construction sector is building tons of crap buildings, actually, that don't really work. They have to be repurposed, refurbished, knocked down, that don't actually have a long enough lifespan. And I think there's a really powerful benefit in adoption of kind of algorithmic automated design to get us to better, more appropriate solutions that can really serve more ambitious versions of the built environment.
But, sorry, question from the floor. Yes.
Actually, I like the sound of that, the idea of being able to experiment with something before it's been built, because actually the reality of a building is it does last a long time, most of the time.
Ideally, it should.
But how in practice with the stuff that you're doing, and I really like the idea of the crowdsourced design, how much can you learn from people's engagement with that? Where can you make decisions about what you're doing through the way that they interact with that software?
So, well, actually, in both those examples, we don't at all track their behaviours, and that you can design on those things and nobody else can see what you do. That was a decision we made quite early that would be very spooky to see what others do. But there are other algorithmic approaches that we can adopt. So we use those tools internally, and we can automate the creation of many different options ourselves. Lots of people are interested in using something like machine learning in the construction sector, but the barrier to that normally is you have to have a reasonably good data set before you can really start to understand things. That simply doesn't exist. But there are other things that we can do. The infrastructure example I showed, we're able to generate many options through our approaches and simulate what that would be like from an install point of view, from an operations point of view, et cetera, and also a disassembly point of view, actually, which is super important. We're also able to do, through kind of our approach to design for manufacture and prefabrication, once you have a kind of catalogue of known components that are easily quantifiable, you can start to understand the material consequences of your design decisions. And you can also start to understand, well, it's not just a sketch model. Actually, we're able to generate very detailed construction-grade models, like super quick. I can quantify that, but I can also understand how I could modify it. So could an office building become a residential building? Actually, the difference between an office building and 80% of a hospital facility is not that much in terms of building performance. Operating things is slightly different, but so we do that kind of simulation as well, and that can be very valuable whether you're a healthcare provider or a school or a commercial developer that wants to have hold an asset for 100 years, let's say. That might go through different changes.
Can I just answer from a physical perspective as well, because I think it's a really good question. The mistake a lot of people make, I think, is just use the bamboo as an example. You're not going to be building an office out of bamboo any time soon. It will take a decade for building regs to catch up. What you can do is you can build a 2-story pavilion building that isn't residential or office, because the building regs are different. So rather than trying to to overcome the big issue that will take a long time, adopt it on a much smaller scale, demonstrate the benefits. It goes back to my shaming point to a certain extent, and then actually people will realise that it has strong benefits and you can replicate that. So for me, it's about bite-sized chunks and demonstrating to the industry that these things are possible.
You mentioned that property won't change itself from inside, that the change will come from outside. Does that mean that when big tech takes its eyes off cars and automotive and it looks over there at buildings, that there's a lot of sitting ducks in the property industry amongst the...
I'm surprised it hasn't happened already. You look at the big tech giants, it's interesting because I think they're finding it not quite as easy as they thought they would. But equally, there's so much innovation and frankly so much R&D money that they will have an impact. And I think I've written about this before. I think there'll be some dead dinosaurs within the property industry by the time they finish.
Yeah, okay. And you mentioned about social investment, responsible investment, which I think is a fascinating area of sort of finance and the future of investment in real estate. Are you seeing investors putting a premium on things like social value, green value?
It's massively reassuring for me that yes, is a short answer. I think 5 years ago, no. I think in the last 2 to 3 years, it has made a significant difference. And I think that's why I'm really excited, because I think the money now is focused on both social and environmental change. And I think a lot of local authorities are as well. Ironically, perhaps not so much the GLA, but certainly outside of London, a real focus on prioritising the environmental and social value aspects of development.
Okay. One final question down the line. Does the industry need to change its approach to risk, to fund failures in order to get to successes? Jo, nice easy one for you to finish on.
I think definitely, and I think, as I said earlier, that's going to be a key role for the lawyer to help clients to assess that risk and frame it in a different way. I think just also in the way that lawyers approach risk, it's going to change fundamentally. So with our use of technology, we're having to train people to trust the tech, which is quite a mind shift. So definitely our attitude to risk will change and evolve as more data becomes available.
I can only hope that is the case, because the adoption cycle, it seemed to be deemed too high risk to put some technology in, which can only be an enabler to reduce risk in time. So it's a bit of a win-win. So risk sharing, I think will have to happen for the tech providers out there to actually get anywhere. Certainly, in my view, in construction.
Yeah, I always find it really amusing when, if you try and do something different in a project in the built environment, so when people talk about risk, so the implication of that is that currently everything is fine, and if you change it, you might make it worse.
Yeah.
But it's the majority of things happen in construction, design, engineering, construction, built environment sector are bad. Most people don't enjoy it. The outcome's not very good, and everything takes too long. It's too expensive. The idea that somehow we could break that is by changing up the way it's done. I find a bit strange, actually. I have to say. I think more likely people's idea of risk is more about their risk to their business model rather than risk to the project. But in case we change too much.
I'm just going to repeat what I said. It's about bite-sized chunks. So it's in my example previously, with that, don't obsess about bamboo, but we've got a large development with there's probably 400,000 or 500,000 square feet of development. There is a 7,000 square foot pavilion building that's the centerpiece of the public realm, etc. So there's no risk. I mean, worst case scenario, as you said, it's no higher risk than what's already going to be the traditional approach. But worst case for us is you knock it down and you do it again as a percentage of the overall project. There's no risk, and that's how you justify it to people who might otherwise be sceptical.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Please join me in thanking our panelists. Thank you.